Okay, so in the beginning of this week's parasha, we have the story of Korach, who basically incites a rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu, and it's probably the most famous rebellion. And Korach is synonymous with Machlokes, the Torah, the pasuk in the Torah that says, "V'lo yiyech Korach v'cha'adosai," that there shall not be like Korach and like his henchmen, is understood to mean and be a negative prohibition against Machlokes. So this is really sort of the paramount rebellion, if you will, which raises a number of questions. First of all, I wouldn't say this is first of all conceptually, but it's just sort of a point to mention, which is a standalone point, is the name of the parsha, Korach. It's not the only parsha which we have this question about, but why is it that we have the name of a parsha being after such a person, and what is the message from the name of the parsha being specifically Korach? Okay, hopefully we'll have time to get back into that question later on, but more conceptually and more fundamentally, the question is as follows. We know that one of the hallmarks of, we've discussed this a number of times, one of the hallmarks of the Rebbe's Torah, the Rebbe's teachings, is that all facets of Torah, which let's say we divide them generically into the four categories of Pardes, Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod, or even more generically, you could categorize them as Nigla and Pnimus HaTorah, the revealed parts of the Torah, and the mystical and the hidden parts of the Torah. And the Rebbe emphasizes time and again how these are one and the same Torah. We have the terminology or the perspective of the Zohar, that it's like the body and the soul, the Guf and the Neshama. We have Rabbeinu Bechaya, who talks about them all being four different sort of steps on the same ladder. But they're certainly, they're complementary of each other, and certainly shouldn't be contradictory of each other. And this is especially so because, as we learn in Chassidus, and it sort of becomes obvious to us to think that way the more we learn Chassidus, that everything is, as the Alter Rebbe says in the beginning of the chapter 3 of Tanya, that the revealed dimension of Torah, we discussed this recently in the Chassidus discussion on Wednesdays, the revealed dimensions of the Torah, actually, not only do they happen to match up with the mystical parts of the Torah, but they actually are they are a chain of cause and effect, where the Torah, the reality of Torah, the way it is in the higher worlds, sort of develops into through this long chain of cause and effect into the way we perceive Torah here in this world, and that of course corresponds to the mystical and the pshat. So when you have one thing being the cause and another being the effect, then it's even more problematic if the two seem to be at stark contradiction with each other. Case in point is Korach. Of course, from a pshat level, Korach, as we said, is the embodiment of Machlokes, the embodiment of heresy. We find him him being accused of doubting the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. And yet, from the perspective of Chassidus, not only is Korach's claim praised, but it's the problem with Korach was that he was too lofty. And basically, in a nutshell, what it is that Korach wanted something, which is true. It's a good thing to want, and it's a good thing to be, but we're not ready for it. That's the reality of the way it will be when Mashiach comes. And just to give it a little bit more context, we find many things that the way our reality is in this world, in the Golus world, is that of Chesed, and that Gvura is something. The level of Gvura is something which is beyond our capacity, and specifically when Mashiach will come, that's when things will change. That Gvura will be of more prominence. Just to give you a few examples, again, I acknowledge that this is just sort of an overview and not much. I'm not going into it in depth, but I think it is still somewhat helpful to have a little bit of a context. So just a few examples that come to mind. Number one, it says it's brought in Sfarim that when Mashiach comes, we will paskin like Beis Shammai. We all know that nowadays we paskin like Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel corresponds to Chesed. Beis Shammai always corresponds to Gevura. Now we paskin like Beis Hillel, and time of Mashiach we'll paskin like Beis Shammai. Now exactly how that works, how that could be halachically, that we switch from paskining one way to the other, the way is beyond the scope of the Sicha. But that's just another place where you see that Gevura is like that. Similarly, you have the Gemara says that when Mashiach comes, of all the three patriarchs, we will say specifically to Yitzchak, Ki Ato Avinu. Right? Yitzchak corresponds to Gvura, and again, he is the most prominent of the three patriarchs in the time to come. And a similar thing we find that it's brought that the Leviim will become Kohanim. By the way, I'll add one more, is Nekeva to say of Gover, that the female becomes the prominent one of the male, right? Now female is Gvura, male is Chesed, Mashpia, Mekabel, right? So that switches around as well. And more closely related to Korach is the Leviim becoming Kohanim. The Alter Rebbe brings in the Tanya, it says in Kisvei Arizal, that those who are Leviim, the way the Rebbe explains it, those who, Neshamas, which in an earlier lifetime were Leviim, will in the time to come be born into the Neshama, into Kohanim. And again, Kohen is Ish HaChesed, Levi is Gvura, and that is the reality which is too sublime for nowadays. What's that noise? Which is too sublime for nowadays, but is the reality of Mashiach of the Asid Lavi, and that is the level which Korach was aspiring to. And but the reason why Korach was wrong is because we're not yet ready for that. So that's a very brief overview of the light in which we see Korach from the Chassidus perspective of Chassidus. And the question that this Sikha is out to address is not necessarily to get into the details of the Chassidus perspective of Korach, but more generically, how is it possible that the mystical, the Pnimius HaTorah understands Korach to be the most sublime of people, and yet on a pshat level, it's polar opposites, that Korach is the worst of the worst. And so the Rebbe is going to make the argument that actually we have to have at least some element where we could say that even from a pshat level, there was a virtue to Korach and to his henchmen. Now, so in order to understand this, what do we need to do? We need to ask some more questions. What's the storyline? We're all familiar with the storyline. We won't get into too much detail, but the storyline basically is that Moshe is in his attempt to demonstrate the truth of his prophecy, and specifically of that all the positions that he gave to his brother Aaron and to his nephew Yitzhak ben Uziel were not from his own doing, but they were they were directives of Hashem. So he basically sets up this contest where he has Korach and Dasan Va'aviram, and they managed to convince 250 Nasiya Yisrael. Don't forget, these were not just average Jews. These were princes of tribes. These were prominent people, prominent Jews. And he manages to convince 250 of them to participate in this Keteras contest. And of course, we know the end of it is that they all died. Right? And so we have to ask the obvious question, what were they thinking? Right? They had seen the power of the Keteras in the past. This is some time after the story of Nadav and Avihu, who messed with the Keteras. And again, we're not going to get now into the whole understanding of Nadav and Avihu, but simply put, they brought Keteras unauthorized, and they died for it. So what were the 250 people thinking? Now, Rashi addresses, the Medrash quoted by Rashi addresses this question, and basically says something along the lines of, well, yeah, they were suicidal, right? Which further begs the question, why? I mean, again, why were these 250 people who were not just people, but they were leaders, and presumably they were leaders because they were worthy of being leaders. And this is before the day when every other person was suffering from mental. Yeah, I mean, no. Jokes aside, I think it's an acknowledged fact in halacha that mental illness is much more of a reality today than it even was even a couple hundred years ago, and certainly than it was 3,000 years ago.
So it was they had in their mind that it was worth to die for.
So that precisely. So what's up? What? Why did they? So they were suicidal. Okay. Why? What was it? Just we're not going to so easily accept that they were just plain suicidal. There has to be some more substance to the suicidal feelings that they had. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two is that we find a very strange expression that Moshe Rabbeinu says when he's rebuking them, and he says, the Jewish people, we only have, other nations had many gods and many priests and many temples and many altars, but we only have one God, one da-da-da, and he lists out one Kohen God. And then he says, and you, 250 people, each want to have Kahuna Gedola. I also want that. And then he continues, we're going to do this contest with the 250, with everyone bringing the Keteras, and the survivor is the winner, right? Now, by the way, I should point out that it actually in the Chumash, it does not say explicitly that they wanted Kahuna Gedola, that they wanted to be high priests. It says that they wanted to be Kohanim, priests. And we'll see perhaps in a moment why they wanted to be priests. But we do find here this medrash, which Rashi quotes, which specifically suggests that they wanted to be Kohanim Gedolim, which is the plural of Kohen Gadol, and also the Targum Yonasim and Targum Onkelos, which are very early sources, also explicitly say that they wanted to be Kohen Gadols, Kohanim Gedolim. So why is Moshe saying, in other words, he's in the middle of reprimanding these people for the rebellion that for the coup that they're taking a part in, and telling them that we're going to, encouraging them to retract. And in the middle, he throws in, I also want to be a Kohen Gadol. What's the point of saying that? I mean, if this is a terrible thing, then why does Moshe Rabbeinu want it? And if he wants it, why is he telling them to that? How does it help his cause to tell them that? Right? Even if for whatever reason we will justify that Moshe Rabbeinu had reason to want it, what's his purpose in telling that to them? Okay.
Just a way to be more, more in their page.
So you're saying it's a way of sort of identifying with them. Yeah. Okay. That's I hear that. I think that the problem, again, this is not just this is Chachamim Hazara B'Divreichem, right? This is Moshe Rabbeinu talking, and every word Moshe Rabbeinu says is precise. Moshe Emes, V'Seirosei Emes, and it's the epitome of truth, and there's no sarcasm or cynicism or he could hear their pain if there's something to hear without putting himself in the same boat. I think that's the main point over here. Okay, and finally, a very important question. And you know what? In order to understand this question properly, let's read a Rambam together. Hold on. So this Rambam is in the beginning of chapter 8 of Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, the first set of laws in the Rambam, where he lays out the foundation of Torah, and he's talking about prophecy. Prophecy is obviously prophecy in general, and the prominence of Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy specifically are, of course, fundamentals of Jewish faith, without which, right, nothing begins, because who says the Torah is the Torah, right? And let me read to you this Rambam. The Jews, again, this is Torah chapter 8, halacha 1. The Jews did not believe in Moshe Rabbeinu because of the wonders that he performed. Whenever anyone's belief is based on wonders, the commitment of his heart has shortcomings because it is possible to perform a wonder through magic or sorcery. So basically, Moshe Rabbeinu comes from Midian, lands in Egypt, and he starts doing wonders. He turns his staff into a snake, and he does the 10 plagues, the blood, the frogs, etc. All of that are not absolute proof in Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy, because that could all have been magic and sorcery. And indeed, so in the footnotes here, the Rebbe refers to the Ben Ezra and the Ramban and the Chaim, who all elaborate on different perspectives of how the notion of prophecy, the phenomena of prophecy, was certainly very not in style, and it would have been very, let's just say, the way the Ben Ezra puts it, there were certainly many Jews who had good, who were very doubtful about prophecy being a real thing, right? So that was sort of step one in the way, but then it continues. Before we continue, the Rambam continues. All the wonders that Moshe Rabbeinu performed in the desert were not intended to serve as proof of the legitimacy of his prophecy, but rather were performed for a purpose. It was necessary to drown the Egyptians, so he split the sea and sank them in them. We needed food, so he provided us with the man. And he doesn't talk here about we were thirsty, so he split the rock, providing us with the water. Korach banned, Korach, there we go. Korach banned, what's this word here? Something against him, so the earth swallowed them up. The same applies to the other wonders, right? He doesn't talk specifically about the 10 plagues, but the point is that Moshe Rabbeinu was doing these miracles because they were necessary, because we needed the results, not to prove the truth of his prophecy. So what is the source of the proof of our belief in him? Says the Rambam, the revelation of Har Sinai, where our very eyes saw, not as strangers, our very self we saw, and our very ears heard that there was fire, thunder, and lightning, and he entered thick clouds, and the voice spoke to him, Moshe, go tell them the following. So we, the Jewish people, collectively, the 600,000, the 3 million Jewish people, saw and heard God address Moses. And that is the ultimate proof of Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy. And then the Rambam says a very important thing. The pasuk in Parshas Yisro says, Exodus 19:9, behold, I will come to you in the thick of a cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking to you, so that they will believe in you forever. Okay? So Hashem tells Moshe clearly, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu clearly that the Jewish people will believe in you forever, not because of miracles that you're doing, but simply because they heard me talk to you, right? So how is it possible that Moshe Rabbeinu then, the Torah says La'olam forever, but this is not even forever. This is right then in that very generation, not a short time, a couple of years after the episode, the revelation of Sinai, comes along Korach and calls into question the whole truth of Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy, and he says, "Lo Hashem shlochani," that Hashem did not send Moshe to. Yeah, Moshe Rabbeinu says when he tells them that the ground is going to open up and swallow them up, he says that if there's no miraculous death of these people, then that means that Hashem indeed did not send me, and that I did all these things from my own heart. But right, so you see, that's what Korach was about. He was doubting Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy. By the way, just one more thing that came to mind. which about the Gvura versus Chesed, is Talis Shakula Tchelas, which we saw. Tchelas means, spoke about this on Sunday. Tchelas means to smite. Makas Becheres. Tchelas is Gvura. So Korach had a Talis Shakula Tchelas. That's also something reminiscent of Yemei Mashiach. So this explains. Anyway, back to where we were. Okay. So again, let's just recap what we've discussed so far. Our fundamental question, which we're trying to address over here, is how do we synthesize between the pedestal upon which Chassidus promotes Korach versus the straightforward reading of the story that Korach is an evil heretic. And in order to understand this, we've asked three questions. Number one, why were these 250 people so desperate to bring to the Keteras, even though it was going to be suicidal? Number two, why does Moshe Rabbeinu say that he sort of puts himself in the same boat as those members of the rebellion? And number three, how is it possible that in the very generation of Matan Torah, Hashem's promise to Moshe that Matan Torah would be that everyone would always believe in Korach, that was challenged.
Public memory is very short.
Sorry?
Public memory is very short.
That's true.
People forget.
That's true. But the main point of a good point. But the main point over here is that Hashem promised Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem promised him that the Jewish people will believe in you forever because of this experience. Okay. And so here comes really the crux of the Rebbe's chiddush in this whole thing. And the Rebbe says like this: It's true that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to make these appointments, that Aaron is the Kohen Gadol and no other, right? And Korach did not doubt that, right? So that's what we're starting about. How could it be that the Korach did not doubt that? However, Korach thought that it can be changed. And we find that just like we find that a person could daven, and there could be a gzar din, it could be a certain decree that Hashem wants, it's set up in a certain way, and then we daven and the decree changes. So too, Hashem initially decided that Aaron should be the Kohen Gadol, and Korach is saying, okay, but maybe that's up for discussion. Maybe we could change that. Now, of course, later on, Korach gets completely derailed, and he goes way off the charts. But his initial point of departure is he wants to be the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol is a very good thing, wanting to be Kohen Gadol. Why does he want to be Kohen Gadol? Because he wants to be close to God. In Matan Torah, it's interesting because Rashi in one of the midrashim. So just sorry, 1 second. Rashi says that. Okay, we'll get to that later. Oh, here it is. That Rashi says when they say Kol Ha'ila Kolam Kadoshim, we're all holy. What are they saying? So Rashi spells it out. We all heard God speak at Sinai. What did they hear God speak at Sinai? So the Rabbi brings it from the Baal HaTurim that really, if not for the sin of the Egel, then all the Jewish people would have been fit to be Kohen Gadol. And in fact, the Torah, Hashem actually says before Matan Torah, "V'atem tiyum meleches kohanim," you'll be to me a kingdom of Kohanim. So there's precedent to this that everyone can and should be Kohanim. And Korach, the Rebbe goes here with the approach that basically there's Korach and there's the 250 princes, right? So the Rebbe goes here with the approach that Korach wanted to be the Kohen Gadol instead of Aaron HaKohen. He wanted to substitute him. And that the 250, they wanted to all be Kohen Gadol. So Korach agreed that there should be one, but he wanted it to be him instead of Aaron. And the 250 Nesiim, they wanted that there should be 251 Kohanim Gedolim, right? But basically the point over here is that we find change, right? Even Hashem decreed on Sodom, right? And Avram could. There was a problem that there weren't any righteous people in Sodom. But had there been righteous people in Sodom, Avram could have changed the Gzeirah. Not only that, specifically when it comes to Kohanim, originally, who was supposed to be the Kohen Gadol? Who was supposed to be the Kohenim? The firstborns. The firstborns, right? Then the firstborns participated in the sin of the Kohen Gadol of the golden calf. So it was taken away from them, and we see, and it was given to the tribe, to that family of the tribe of Levi. So we see that the Kohenship is what's the word? It can mutate. It can change. So Korach says, okay, maybe it can change again. And Korach has all the reason to want it to change to him. First of all, why was it taken away from the firstborns? Korach himself was a firstborn. Why was it taken away from the firstborns? Because they participated in the golden calf. But Korach didn't participate in the golden calf because he was part of the Shevet Levi. Who did participate, at least on some level, in the Egel Azav? Aaron, right? Part of the whole problem is that Aaron does have some facilitation responsibility for the golden calf. What was Korach doing because Aaron did that? Because Aaron did that, Aaron that because of the stain that Aaron brought on the Jewish people, the Korach had to kill fellow Jews who were guilty of serving the golden calf, right? So Korach. So whereas Aaron does have some association, whatever level it is, right? Korach, not only does he not have any association, he is a Levi, and he's a firstborn. So it's more proper for him to get the Mefarshim also point out that the same is true of Dasan and Aviram. That Dasan and Aviram, there's Korach, there's a 250, and then the Dasan and Aviram, who are sort of Korach's henchmen. The 250 are the people he recruited to be part of the whole rebellion, but Dasan and Aviram are sort of, they have their teeth thick in it, with like Korach does. Dasan and Aviram are from the tribe of Yehuda, right? Who was supposed to have, not from the tribe of Yehuda, from the tribe of Reuven, right? Reuven had the firstbornhood taken away from him, right? Because of an inappropriate thing that he did, and it was given, basically, part of it was given to Yosef. That's why his shevet was split into two, right? And the other part of it was given, the priesthood, which was also part of it, was given to Shevet Levi. So that's how Dasan and Aviram come into the picture, because and the 250, our grandfather Reuven, he's the original firstborn who's also supposed to be the original Bechor. So we see here, we have a lot of precedent and a lot of precedent to say that this can be changed. So they're saying, hey, you know what? Perhaps the reason why why Moshe gave Aaron the Kohen Gadol wasn't because Hashem told him give it to Aaron. Perhaps Moshe better ask, can I give it to Aaron? And Hashem said yes. And by the way, also there's another point here, and regardless of that, even if it was the direct command from God, we find precedent for that being able to change, and so that's basically where this comes from. There's I don't remember exactly where I saw this, but I certainly didn't make this up myself. It must be in one of the Mefarshim references in the footnotes. That who was the firstborn double portion given to? Yosef. Now Ephraim's leader is Yehoshua. Yehoshua is Moshe Rabbeinu's lad, yeah. So he's Mashasei. So there's a lot of sort of nepotism, so to speak, going on, and so that could even be more room to think that Moshe, that this is not a direct command from God, but this is a command from God which was inspired by Moshe Rabbeinu's request. Okay, not 100%. I definitely saw something along those lines when I was reading the sources preparing it. But either way, so then it's interesting also that what's the response? after Korach, what do they say? Moshe emes to say Rasi emes. Moshe is true and his Torah is true. But the word emes specifically, we know in Chassidus, we always talk about this, that the word emes connotes something which is not changeable. So that was their acknowledgement. Was we thought that the fact that he gave out these appointments to the people that he gave it to may have been changeable. And now we recognize that no, this is absolute truth. It's not changeable. I really would like to find this thing that I saw about Yeshua because it was very interesting, but I can't find it right now. Okay, one very important thing though. What does it mean that they were doubting the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu? Hashem promised Moshe that his prophecy would not be doubted. So how come they were doubting the Nebuah of Moshe Rabbeinu? Says Rabbi, no, they weren't doubting the Nebuah of Moshe Rabbeinu at all. But we know that Moshe Rabbeinu is Anav Ma'od Mikol Adam. Moshe Rabbeinu is the humblest of all people. And so Moshe Rabbeinu thought, in his humility, he understood it to be meaning that they were doubting his prophecy, but not that that was in fact what was going on. And we find a similar thing by Yaakov Avinu, that even though he was promised that he would be kept safe, nevertheless, kotointi, that because of his bittul, because of his humility, he was concerned that Shem Nishyare Bechet, that despite Hashem's literal promise that he would be fine, he was concerned that perhaps he wouldn't be fine. And so we find precedent to such a thing, and perhaps that was the same thing that was going on with Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, moving on. I can't find this thing that I found about Yeshua. Moving on. So now we come to the point that Rabbi that you were making. Basically, why were so we've established that the initial point of departure over here was not doubting the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. It was indeed a true noble desire to want to become closer to God, to want to be kohanim, to want to be kohanim gedolim, to want to live up to the potential that the Jewish people had before the sin of the golden calf, to be kohanim. Now then, it got derailed. But what then happened? They said, okay, you're going to bring the Torah. So they're thinking, you know what? Here's a chance to get what we want. We want to have that experience of closeness to God that comes just like Nadav and Avihu did, which cost them their lives. But they had that experience of coming close to God. That was the type of suicidal that they were. And indeed, we find precedent to that, which is the point you were making, that in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, it was very common for the high priest not to be Motzi Shnosei, not to survive Yom Kippur. And nevertheless, we find that people were clamoring to and pulling strings and connections to try and be the Kohen Gadol, even though they knew that they would likely not live out, be able to survive. Nevertheless, it was worth it for them, that they felt worth it to have that experience of doing the Avodah in the Kodesh HaKodashim on Yom Kippur, even if they won't survive. That is that was the sort of the goal that they were after. And so that's again the mistake, as we'll see soon, the mistake that they made. And going back to a point that we mentioned earlier on, right? The name of the parasha is Korach, and it's sort of like an instruction. Like this initial desire of Korach to want to be a Kohen and to want to be a Kohen Gadol is virtuous and appropriate. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu says. I also want this. I also want, because the wanting to be a Kohen Gadol, that is appropriate. Every Jew should want to be a Kohen Gadol. The problem is when it derails and it goes further than that. Okay. Now we move on. Okay, so look here, we're in the Rambam, Hilchos Shmita V'Yevel, chapter 13, halacha 12, where it says like this. It's actually, in this Rambam, it's chapter 13, halacha 13. Okay. That's, yeah. No, it's 12 and 13. Okay, very good. Right, let's read 12 and 13. So it's like this. Why did the Levites not receive a portion in the inheritance of Eretz Yisrael and the spoils of the war like their brethren? Because they were set aside to serve God and minister unto Him, and to instruct the people at large in His path, in His just paths and righteous judgments. As the Pasuk says, they will teach you judgments to Yaakov and your turn to Israel. Therefore, they were set apart from the ways of the world. They do not wage war like the remainder of the Jewish people, nor do they receive an inheritance, nor do they acquire for themselves through physical power. Instead, they are the legion of God, etc. Okay, so basically, Shevet Levi are designated set aside from the rest of the Jewish people to be teaching God's Torah to the others. Right? Then he continues. Not only the tribe of Levi, but any one of the inhabitants of the world whose spirit generously motivates him, and he understands with his wisdom to set himself aside and stand before God to serve him, minister him, and to know God, proceeding justly as God has made him, removing from his neck the yoke of the many reckonings which people seek. He is sanctified as holy of holies. God will be his portion and heritage forever, right? So essentially what the Rambam is saying is that if somebody so wishes, if somebody's spirit generously motivates him, right, then he can choose to become sort of a Levi by osmosis and behave like a Levi and remove himself from the yoke of this world and be sort of removed and involved in Torah study and in Torah teaching and in holy activities. And there is in this Kaddish Kodesh Kadoshim, he indeed becomes sanctified, holy of holies. So we have here a bit of an irony. On the one hand, we say that not every Jew there's no mitzvah you have to want to be a Levi. If your spirit generously motivates you, then you could sort of become a quote-unquote Levi, right? Obviously not halachically, strictly speaking, like the laws of a Levi, but the same status, the same sanctification status of a Levi, right? When it comes to the Kohen Gadol, we're saying on the contrary, every Jew has to want it. Even Moshe Rabbeinu makes a point of telling them, I also want this. Yet at the same time, we're saying no one can have it, besides the one, right? Only one Kohen Gadol. So what are we to make of this? And so, very good. In matters of holiness, we do try to look up to those people who have more than us. Right. And so the Rebbe said that these three levels, in other words, regular Jew, Levi, Kohen Gadol, correspond to three aspects of service of Hashem. Number one, mitzvahs. Mitzvahs basically, first of all, literally, mitzvahs are things that we do with physical items in this world. You take tzitzis, which are made of physical wool, tefillin, which are made of physical leather, and you do a mitzvah with them. And that sort of symbolizes or represents, generally, people who are living in this world, 2 feet on the ground, they're involved in business, they're involved in life the way this world, quote unquote, dictates it, such, and they're doing so at the same time as being focused on serving Hashem, know God in early ways, etc. That's step one. Step two is Torah. Torah study is beyond this world. He brings here Torah are not susceptible to Tumah. Torah is not subject to time and space, right? So even though in order to bring a carbon, I have to do it in Jerusalem, and I have to do it at a time when the temple is standing, and I have to, etc. when I learned the Torah about bringing a carbon, I could be in the diaspora, I could be where the temple is not standing, and nevertheless, it's as if I brought a carbon, right? Torah is sort of operates within this world, but really it's aloof, right? And then finally, we have Mesiras Nefesh. And Mesiras Nefesh is not something which can be quantified, and it's not something which it says here it's not explicitly mentioned in the Torah without getting into exactly what that means. But the point is that it's something which sort of Torah expects Mesiras Nefesh, but it sort of supersedes Torah at the same time. For those who remember, we discussed this at great length last year around Hanukkah time, when we spoke about Mesiras Nefesh and about how the Rambam says very clearly that voluntary Mesiras Nefesh is forbidden, and yet the Balei HaTosfos talk about the heroes and the Hakadoshim who did do not only Mesiras Nefesh themselves, but even killed their own children to save them from possible forced conversion to Christianity. And again, it's a bit beyond the scope to go into the details, but the point is that there is a point where Mesiras Nefesh is so ingrained in the essence of who a Yid is, as Nishta Vil and Nishta Ken, that it's impossible for him to separate himself from God. That, again, you have to be careful how you say this because we don't want to give the wrong impression, but somehow it sort of supersedes that even though the halacha is, quote unquote, that you can't do Mesiras Nefesh, nevertheless, those who did it, not because if they had they asked the Shiloh, had they had the question, then if you have a question, the answer is no. But if there is no question because it's not possible for it to be different, then that is Mesiras Nefesh. Again, I just want to put this out. I'm not explaining this clearly now. It's on the Hanukkah class from last year, and it's on the YouTube and the Spotify, etc. Right. So those are the three levels: mitzvahs, which is living life as a good Jew in this world; Torah, which is living life out of this world, and then there's Mesiras Nefesh. And so this corresponds to the three levels which we spoke about. Of course, most Jews are Hanig Be'eminig Derech Eretz. You have to have a job, you have to live in this world, etc. So that's just sort of the default position, right? How does the Rambam describe Shevet Levi? They are separated from everyone else, and they are set aside to serve God and to learn Torah and to teach Torah, etc. Right? So there, we're not saying that everybody has to do that. You don't have to do that. There's nothing wrong with being a good Jew and making an honest living. But if you want to do that, if you're what was the word he said? If your spirit generously motivates you, not you have to do that, Bob, because you're a Levi. But us, right?
I'm motivated, can't you tell?
If we're motivated, then we could do it. But if we choose to do it, then we do it, right? And then you have Mesiras Nefesh, which Mesiras Nefesh is on the one hand, Mesiras Nefesh is manifest in the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol is always at that peak level. He's never allowed to leave Yerushalayim. He almost never leaves the Beis HaMikdash. He goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. He is representative of that sort of deep-seated, undescribable and unquantifiable and undefinable connection that a Yid has with Hashem. That is manifest in the Kohen Gadol. So on the one hand, we're saying, yes, it's important for everybody to want to be a Kohen Gadol because every Jew has to want to and strive to have that awareness of Mesiras Nefesh at all times. But at the same time, no one can be a Kohen Gadol because that's not the purpose for this world. The purpose of this world is either to be a regular Jew or to be a Levi, but at some level to be grounded with 2 feet on the ground and to make this world into a Dira B'Tachtonim and not to escape this world, which is essentially what Nadav and Avihu did. And everything fits into place over here with the Shevet Levi, the Kohen Gadol, and the regular Jew. And here we understand that even though, yes, in Shutish HaMikra, so to speak, from the historical persona of Korach and his henchmen and the rest of the crew and all of those people, that it was a terrible rebellion and it was machlokes, etc., etc. But at some level, even from a pshat, from a historical perspective, we can say that at least that point of departure was virtuous, namely they're striving to be closer to Hashem, they're striving to be a Kohen Gadol to the extent that they convince themselves that perhaps even though God either commanded Moshe to do that or agreed for Moshe to do that, it can be changed. And as we discussed, there was precedent for that notion.